Mr. Chairman, delegates and my fellow citizens, I proudly accept your nomination.
In the name of all the working families who are the strength and soul of America, I accept your nomination for President of the United States of America.
36 days of political combat at the highest level.
The worst 36 days of my life.
It was awful.
In the end, the Supreme Court had the last word.
Legal battles are underway. Take the court case launched last week in Palm Beach County. 9 core supporters claim the confusing ballot papers deprived them of their right to vote properly. So politically sensitive is this, 5 judges have already refused to hear the case. A favourable ruling here might open the door to a revote and enough new votes to hand Al Gore the election. If that happened, it would be almost unprecedented.
For the past 3 months, 2 men have been in a race that would define American politics and ultimately the course of history, a race to be President of the United States of America. George W. Bush, the governor of Texas, and the incumbent Vice President Al Gore have been in a tight-fought campaign since accepting their party's nominations in August. Since then, the pair have debated each other on 3 separate occasions, with critics and the public arguing over who would perform better, both on stage and on the campaign trail. Most agreed that whilst Gore was clearly more articulate and had a deeper level of understanding of government and policy, he struggled to connect with undecided voters on the same level as Bush, who came across as more relatable and likeable. Just look at this clip from one of their debates.
That I can get something positive done on behalf of the people. That's what the question in this campaign is about. It's not only what's your philosophy and what's your position on issues, but can you get things done? And I believe I can.
In Florida, Bush campaigned hard, while Gore leaned on celebrity support.
Al Gore supports your enthusiasm for life, so tomorrow please I urge you to support him. Please vote for Al Gore. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Are you ready to win? Will you fight to win? Are we going to win? I have no doubt whatsoever, because I see in this magnificent gathering a determination to forge a future that is worthy of all of the people of Florida.
And tensions remained incredibly high, with neither candidate wanting to take too many risks. All of this tension came to a head on November 7th, 2000. On election night, millions of Americans cast their votes. Polls closed, people went home, and televisions flicked on across the country. Families watched TV anchors and reporters, expecting a result, unaware that they were about to witness one of the most chaotic election nights in US history.
This is a News Source 13 Election Special 2000, The Vote.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jenny Ryan.
And I'm Don Elhard. Welcoming you to our continuing coverage of 2000, The Vote. We'll be here throughout the night to bring you, along with ABC News, the most complete election coverage here in the history of Rochester. And I mentioned the word history, and in effect, we will be making history here in Rochester ourselves tonight. News Source 13 is going to be broadcasting the first ever internet continuous election coverage. That's going to begin at 9 o'clock tonight. And we will be back in just a moment. First, we want to remind you of the power of one vote.
But why is one vote so important in the USA? It all comes down to one phrase:
Electoral
The Electoral College.
The Electoral College.
Electoral College.
The Electoral College.
The Electoral College.
The Electoral College. But what actually is it? To understand that, you need to see how it works. In the US, presidential elections aren't determined by the popular vote. Instead, they're decided by a system called the Electoral College. Rather than counting every vote nationally, the country is broken up state by state. Each state is assigned a set number of electoral votes, roughly based on its population size. In 2000, a smaller state like Delaware had just 3 electoral votes, while a much larger state such as California had 54. But it's not proportional in the way you might expect. To win a state, a candidate only needs a simple majority, that being 51% or more. If they cross that line, they don't just win the state, they win all of its electoral votes. There are 538 electoral votes in total, and a majority of 270 or more is needed to win the presidency. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back to election night. As at 7:49 p.m, Democrats began to rejoice, as news stations received confirmation that the state of Florida had been won by Al Gore, therefore giving him a vital 25 electoral votes.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column. This is a state both campaigns desperately wanted to win. The state of Florida fought over very hard. The state with the Republican governor named Bush.
And altogether, according to Senator John
Mike, excuse me 1 second. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Mike, you know I wouldn't do this if it weren't big. Florida goes for Al Gore. Now, folks, the equation changes.
However, just over 2 hours later, at 10:17 p.m, things got strange.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column. 25 very big electoral votes in the home state of the governor's brother, Jeb Bush.
And we can now say with absolute certainty, I believe, that unless one of these states that we've called changes, whoever wins Florida will be the next president of the United States.
Then, to the delight of Republicans, at 2:17 a.m. on November 8th, Florida was called for George W. Bush, and he was announced president-elect.
Bush wins. Florida goes Bush. The presidency is Bush. That's it.
The home state of Governor Jeb Bush. It's going to be a much happier Thanksgiving for the Bush family.
ABC News is now going to project that Florida goes to Mr. Bush. Just stop and absorb that for a second.
Al Gore called him to announce his concession. However, as Bush began preparing his victory speech, TV stations retracted their statement yet again and put Florida back into the too close to call category.
We are going to take Florida back into the too close to call column.
CBS News has now, for the second time tonight, pulled back Florida. We are now putting Florida in the undecided category. This is a wild, woolly, and weird situation.
Less than half an hour later, he received another phone call from Gore, this time retracting his concession.
Let's just point out that Florida has gone from too close to call to Gore, to too close to call to Bush, to too close to call. I suppose Nader can have some hopes that he might carry Florida in about a day or two. But this is truly amazing.
As election night came to a close, it became clear that neither candidate had enough electoral votes to clinch the presidency. Gore only had 255, and Bush had 246. The race would come down to the state of Florida, and eventually, its 25 electoral votes would decide who would win the White House. The reason for all of this was that when the polls closed in Florida, it was still too close to call. This automatically triggered a machine recount. When that was finished the day after the election, on November 9th, it was found that Bush was leading by a margin of just 900 votes out of over 6 million cast. Because the margin was so slim, Gore demanded a recount by hand in 4 crucial counties, those being Volusia, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade. This meant that they count the votes in those counties all over again. However, the Florida Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, a Republican who had actually worked on the Bush campaign team, insisted that this recount be completed by November 14th. The Gore campaign team petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to extend the deadline for the recount, arguing that the original cutoff did not allow enough time for votes to be properly examined. The court agreed with this argument and ruled in Gore's favour, extending the deadline to November 26th. However, by the time this decision was made, the recount process was already under significant pressure. Of the counties that had begun manual recounts, only 2 were able to submit their results by the deadline. One county abandoned the recount altogether, stating that it could not be completed in time, while another county finished counting but missed the deadline by just 2 hours, meaning its results were rejected and not included in the final tally. Even with these limitations, the impact of the recounts that were accepted was substantial. Bush's lead in Florida continued to narrow, shrinking to just 537 votes, an extraordinarily small margin. Given how close the race had become, the Florida Supreme Court then granted Gore's second request for a much larger recount. This recount would involve around 70,000 ballots that had been identified as questionable and therefore had not counted in the initial results. But as officials began to take a closer look at these ballots, a more fundamental problem started to emerge. The issue was no longer simply about recounting votes, but about the balloting methods themselves, how they were designed, how voters interacted with them, and how those design choices had the potential to create widespread confusion. In Palm Beach County, the ballots used in the election followed the butterfly ballot design. Instead of listing candidates in a single vertical column, the ballot split them across 2 facing pages, with a single column of hole punches running down the centre. Voters were required to punch the hole next to the name of their chosen candidate, but the layout made it far from clear which hole corresponded to which name. As a result, many voters believed they were voting for Al Gore. But instead, punched the hole for Pat Buchanan, whose name appeared on the opposite page, but whose hole was above Gore's. This confusion wasn't just hypothetical. Pat Buchanan, a far-right wing candidate who had previously made very anti-Semitic statements, such as claiming that 850,000 Jews had not been murdered in the Holocaust at the Treblinka extermination camp, and openly defended a convicted Nazi war criminal who he claimed was innocent, received nearly 3,500 votes, more than any other county in the state. The reason this is so odd is that Gore's running mate, Joe Lieberman, was a practicing Jewish man. In a strongly Democratic county like Palm Beach, it made little sense for large numbers of Gore supporters to deliberately vote for Buchanan. At the same time, thousands of ballots were rejected entirely because voters had punched more than one hole, invalidating their vote. These became known as overvotes, and under Florida law could not be counted. Additionally, some ballots hadn't been punched properly, meaning the paper was still attached. These became the infamous hanging chads. It became clear that the ballot design had confused and failed voters. Slowly, the question shifted from counting votes to deciding who had the authority to decide how they should be counted. That question would ultimately be answered not in Florida, but by the United States Supreme Court. With the recount process descending into confusion and legal uncertainty, the dispute over Florida's votes was escalated beyond the state itself. Multiple lawsuits were filed by both campaigns, challenging which ballots could be counted, how they should be evaluated, and whether a statewide recount was even constitutional. Eventually, the case reached the United States Supreme Court, where it became known as Bush v. Gore. At the centre of the case was a key question: whether the recount process in Florida violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Bush campaign argued that because different counties were using different standards to determine vote intent, for example, how much of a hole punch needed to be visible, voters were therefore not being treated equally under the law. On December 12, 2000, the Supreme Court issued its final ruling. In a deeply divided 5-4 decision, the court agreed with the Bush campaign, stating that the lack of uniform standards made the recount unconstitutional. Crucially, the court also ruled that there was not enough time to implement a new, constitutionally valid recount before the deadline for certifying Florida's electors. As a result, the recount was halted in time, and protests broke out across the country.
Number 4, pointing over here. Number 5, pointing over there. They either voted for the wrong man or they hit 2 numbers, because they thought they voted for Gore first. They didn't. They voted for Buchanan, and then they voted for somebody else. The problem is, when the sample ballot was sent around to everyone's home, it was in a magazine form.
This ballot is fuzzy. The issue here today is not about black and white. It's about wrong and right.
With no further legal avenues remaining, the original results stood, giving George W. Bush Florida's electoral votes, and with them, the presidency. For the first time in American history, the outcome of a presidential election had been decided by the Supreme Court. George W. Bush went on to serve 2 terms as president, shaping domestic and foreign policy for the first decade of the 2000s. Al Gore, meanwhile, shifted his focus away from politics and became a leading advocate for climate change, raising awareness about the global environmental crisis and even winning a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. The election of 2000 remains a stark reminder of how every vote counts, and how the design of a ballot, a single state, and a handful of legal decisions can shape the course of history.
Possesses weapons of mass destruction is a grave danger to the civilized world and will be confronted. We've begun the search for hidden chemical and biological weapons and already know of hundreds of sites that will be investigated.
Nice, you like it? Yeah, fantastic.
The transition from dictatorship to democracy will take time, but it is worth every effort. Our coalition will stay until our work is done.